Today, April 4th, is the 56th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. He was killed April 4th, 1968 at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. So April 4th is a good day to kind of reflect back on the life and the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Probably the most well-known thing about Martin Luther King Jr. is his famous "I Have a Dream" speech that was given about 5 years before he died at the March on Washington in 1963. And in that speech, he outlined his dream for America, that America would be a place where all people, regardless of what they looked like, regardless of their ethnic background, all people would enjoy the same freedom, the same liberty, the same constitutional rights. And he talked about how what he was proposing, what the Civil Rights Movement was proposing, was not some kind of revolutionary thing. It was merely proposing that the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence be adhered to. So the fascinating thing about his "I Have a Dream" speech is it's not America is fundamentally systemically racist and bad, and we need to just kind of scrap it and start over, which is sometimes kind of the vibe you get today from some protest movements. The tone was much more like, America's not bad, America just needs to be what America claims to be. And if America could be what she claims to be, a place of liberty and justice for all, that would be a wonderful thing. So Dr. King was calling on America to be what America said it was in the founding documents. He quotes the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And he pointed out how, in practice, black Americans had not been treated equally. So there was a call to return to that Declaration of Independence ideal, and to actually live out the meaning of those words, that all people could be regarded as equal under the law. He envisioned a day where his children, his black children, could play happily with white children as brothers and sisters. He envisioned a day where America would be a nation where people would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. He envisioned a day where true justice and true peace was the norm. It was a very beautiful vision, a very beautiful speech. What makes Martin Luther King Jr. and his story all the more remarkable is that he was not just somebody who went around giving speeches. I mean, on one hand, standing on a platform and talking doesn't really cost anything. Anybody can talk, right? But he did a lot more than just talk. He spent a lot of time in jail. He made a point to draw attention to how unjust certain segregation laws were. Well, all segregation laws were. By breaking those laws, he would, go into restaurants that had signs that said "whites only," and get arrested. And the point of being arrested was to draw attention, to get the nation to recognize these laws are wrong. The same year that he gave his "I Have a Dream" speech, he was arrested in Birmingham, and he wrote his famous letter from a Birmingham jail, where, quoting St. Augustine, he pointed out that an unjust law is no law at all, and just like we have a moral duty to obey a just law, equally we have a moral duty to break unjust laws. And that was kind of his vision for civil disobedience. And more than just experience time in jail. He also experienced death threats. His house was once bombed. And then in 1968, when he came to Memphis to help a group of sanitation workers advocate for salary increases, he knew that his life was in danger. He'd been receiving a lot of death threats. And he gave a speech on April 3rd, the night before, and he talked about how he wasn't concerned about his own safety or what lay ahead, because he knew that he was in God's hands. And he made a very beautiful comment hearkening back to the story of Moses in the book of Deuteronomy. Moses did not enter into the promised land, but God gave him the opportunity to climb a mountain and see the promised land before dying. And Martin Luther King Jr. said that he really believed that better days were ahead for America. And he said, I may not get there with you, but I've seen the promise. I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen the promised land. And the next day he was shot and killed. So I highly recommend, chances are most people have heard the I Have a Dream speech that's so famous. Probably fewer people have heard the mountaintop speech because it's not quite as well known. I highly recommend going back, as you go back and listen to it. One last thing before I close. Martin Luther King Jr. has been in the news a lot these last few weeks because of some inflammatory remarks that John MacArthur made about him recently, saying that he wasn't a Christian at all. He was an immoral unbeliever who misrepresented everything about Christ and the gospel. I don't have time to really fully unpack, everything about what MacArthur said, but we do have reason to believe, based on Dr. King's seminary papers that he wrote in the early 50s, years before he died, that he had embraced very liberal theology that discarded a lot of the fundamentals of the faith. The deity of Christ, the virgin birth of Christ, the resurrection, some very big fundamentals. And so I'm assuming that part of MacArthur's accusation against Dr. King as being not a Christian is based on the seminary papers that you can go read online. However, he was a college kid basically when he wrote those papers, and not everybody in college has arrived at where they're going to finally land on a lot of important issues. Not long after MacArthur made that comment, Christianity Today published an article, and the author of that article argued that those seminary papers did not reflect Dr. King's fully formed theology, that in later years he did return to the more orthodox Baptist faith that he had been brought up in. So I don't think it's fair to label Dr. King as an apostate based solely on papers that he wrote when he was 20 years old. That's all I really want to say about that. To MacArthur's allegation that he misrepresented Christ in the gospel, it is true that Dr. King advocated what might be called a social gospel, very socially active approach to the gospel. I don't think that's misrepresenting the gospel, though. I think the gospel itself, if properly understood, demands social action. We can't, with a straight face, tell people about the good news of salvation through Christ if we knowingly are ignoring the suffering they're experiencing here right now in the real world. We have to help people who are suffering, to have any kind of credibility to talk to them about their relationship with God. The church that my family and I attend currently is part of the Anglican Church of North America, and on the church calendar today, Dr. King is actually honored as a renewer of society. So, all that to say, I definitely don't agree with MacArthur in dismissing Dr. King as a not a real Christian. I think the work that he did on behalf of his fellow Americans to help them get a better life was the epitome of Christ-like servanthood. Thank you for listening.